This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes every time I get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the shocking, blasphemous scene of the Last Supper and the Greek god Dionysus that was displayed during the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, and how maybe it's going to rally, at least momentarily, some ecumenism. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutor in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. So I think most of you who are watching this know what happened. I was not watching the Olympics when I was a child. The Olympics were a big deal. I remember the 84 LA games, 88 Seoul, 92 Barcelona. I mean, it was a big deal because back then we didn't have much television, and it was before everybody's kind of opinions went away and streaming. Now there's just so much leisure out there that I think the Olympics have definitely have kind of lost their appeal for a lot of Americans even before this. But in the opening ceremonies, which is taking place in Paris, Paris is hosting the games. They, among other things, had Lady Gaga performing. Celine Dion came out and performed. And one of the things they did was they did a recreation of the Last Supper. Now, they would say that it's not necessarily was a recreation of the Last Supper, and the organizers have apologized, but they've really only apologized because of the outrage. And some notable people that were outraged were Elon Musk admitted he was pretty outraged, and then even the French bishops. And that's said a lot when the French bishops are saying something. But one of the things they did is they had queer people dressed in drag, recreating the Last Supper. And they also had brought out a person dressed half naked, representing the Greek god of Dionysus. And the official explanation for this was, quote, I'm going to read from the Olympic Games X tweet. I guess, I don't know what they call them now. X, they probably don't use the word tweet, but the interpretation of the Greek god Dionysus makes us aware of the absurdity of violence between human beings. I don't know what that means, because Dionysus was the god of a Greek god of frivolity. I don't know exactly what that means. And then later on, when there was outrage about what happened with the Last Supper recreation done by men in drag, they essentially said that it was done as a way to show how open and diverse, it was all about DEI, diversity, exclusion, diversity and inclusion and whatnot. And the thing is, look, there's ways to express that in a way where you're not recreating the Last Supper. So the Olympic Committee and France in general, Paris, the organizers knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. If you wanted to have some inclusion of LGBTIQ, all the things that they have, okay. But there's a way to do it where you're not invoking Jesus Christ. And the thing is, like, Da Vinci was Italian, right? So it's not like some of the opening ceremonies were things that were very French. They did a recreation of Les Mis and all these things. So why are you going to recreate a famous Italian painter's fresco? It's outside of Milan. Why are you going to do that? You were intentionally being blasphemous. This was intentional. And they wouldn't have apologized if there wasn't backlash. And a couple of the tweets out there were, quote, finally, it's true that the Olympics didn't shy away from celebrating diversity in love and race. But if you think that's wrong, I think that's on you. France showed us that they are free, cultured, and secular, and I am here for it. And you're getting a lot of that out there. And these are going to be coming from the anti-religious people. Now, who is outraged from this? Well, hopefully Catholics are. But you also see, and I mentioned about the ecumenism, a lot of Muslims not happy about this. Because remember, they do see Jesus Christ as a prophet. They don't see him as the Son of God. But they do see him as someone that's important, that's revered. So they weren't happy by a bunch of queer people doing that. And understand, if you're openly homosexual in many Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, you can be executed. So in these societies, like Muslim societies, and in the African societies, Sub-Saharan African societies as well, this stuff really isn't tolerated. It's only tolerated in the degenerate, dissolute West. And I think that's what makes this sad. But going back to Cubanism, a lot of Protestants aren't happy about this, right? So this is something that anyone who is a Christian should be outraged by. Anyone who's a practicing Christian, you should be outraged. And the Muslims are outraged as well. And actually, the people who told me about it aren't even really practicing Christians at all. They're like, man, this is wrong. And they were telling me, and of course they told me about it because they know I have this channel. And so I just think it just kind of illustrates how far, not just France has gone, but Europe has gone. When I was in Florence, I did an episode titled Europe is Mission Territory. And there certainly are pockets of traditional Catholicism in Europe, but there's not a lot. There's really not. And Europe is, I would say, 30 years ahead of where the United States is going in terms of our Catholicism. And it's sad. It is sad how Europe has turned its back on its pillars. And what are its pillars? Christianity, Christendom, right? We know this basic European history. You know that Europe was Catholic. It was Christendom. For the first, since the time of Christ, since the Roman Empire made Catholicism the official religion by Theodosius in 380, 381. And then as Christianity moved north towards Central Europe and into Scandinavia, all that was done by about 1000 AD. And so you look up to Martin Luther in the Revolution, the entire European continent was Catholic. And then even after Martin Luther and the Orthodox Schism that happened around the 11th century, still, I mean, Europe was pretty staunchly Christian in terms of its values. And then you saw with the Enlightenment, and then certainly after the French Revolution, and we have episodes here about what really happened in the French Revolution, then you started seeing the secularization, and France was no different. So you saw in the kind of middle part of the 19th century, the attempts by the liberals to get rid of clericism. And so by the Third Republic, by the establishment of the Third Republic after Napoleon III was toppled in 1871, you saw that the government made an attempt to de-emphasize the Catholic Church in France. And during this time in Germany, you had the Kulturkampf, and we're going to do a future episode on the Kulturkampf. Bismarck, who was the head of essentially the Iron Chancellor, the head of the government over in Prussia, which was the leading country in Germany. By this time, 1870, Germany had been unified under Prussian leadership. Kulturkampf was a persecution, I should say, of Catholics. Catholics couldn't hold office. You see in England, we talked about in a previous episode, the penal laws. The penal laws existed, really going back to Queen Elizabeth, and existed to the 1800s. English Catholics were persecuted. Many of them were martyrs early on and then later on. They couldn't hold office. They couldn't have property. So you see this attempt in the late 1800s to minimize and weaken Catholicism. And then you really see it accelerated. Certainly after the Great War, there was a time, the Lost Generation, you think of Hemingway and Fitzgerald and these people, and no doubt, I mean, you see a generation just snuffed out by an aimless war, and then you follow that up with the hedonism of the 1920s and the despair of the 1930s, which led to fascism growing, and then World War II. You know, that was a humongous blow as well. And even though we have people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and we have people like Maximilian Kolbe that were great witnesses to how horrible Nazism was, and then certainly later on we have Cardinal Wyszynski in Poland and later John Paul and other leaders that were fighting the evils of communism, Europe went exceedingly secular. And with that, the governments became pretty anti-Christian. We talked about that not long ago, how in Spain they'd banned the rosary, public recitation of the rosary. So is it really surprising that the International Olympic Committee, and especially the Paris Olympic Committee, would host something that they knew was blasphemous? They knew this. It wasn't like, oh, we accidentally recreated the Last Supper in Jesus Christ with drag queens. Oh, we accidentally, come on. Don't be naive. They intentionally did this. And it tells you, look at the European Union. If you look at the European Union, its charter, it doesn't even mention, and it has a platform of like the fundamentals of Christian unity, it doesn't even mention that Christianity was fundamental and pivotal in the development of the European Union. What does that tell you? I mean, it's like all of them know history. They know it's true, but they got to take it out, right? Because this is the religion of the state. Worship the state. Worship the man. Think of materialism, think of humanism, think of transhumanism, all these things. We have to minimize Christianity. And then what do you get? Look at Europe the last 50 years. Contracepting and aborting themselves out of extinction. You look at the rise of Islam and other non-Western white and Christian religion, people coming in, diluting Europe. I mean, you could look at the demographics. It's pretty haunting how Europe, the Europeans, the white Europeans, are eliminating themselves out of existence. And they still buy this postmodernist, materialist, secular humanist, hedonistic, satanic message. And this is just an outward expression of it. And I think it's sad. But it is good to see, in closing, that people are rallying against it and still decrying this. And on some level, it is ecumenical that people of various ilks and religions are calling this out, saying that this is blasphemous. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. What's your take on this? I would like to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.